So welcome back to another video on the A-League Couch Critics. As you can tell by the title of the video, I'm going to be going over the inaugural 14 clubs that competed in the National Soccer League back in 1977. Before we get into it, I should explain this video is going to be a whole lot longer. I was actually going to explore all 43 clubs that competed in the NSL and where they are now. Written that script, going to take a long time to film that video. And would probably take a lot out of me, so I thought just to make a simpler version, we'll do the first teams from 1977. If we can get maybe 100 likes on this video, I'll look at doing a entire video essay on all 43 clubs, I think it's about 43 clubs, that competed in the NSL. Instead of just kind of listing the clubs and just telling you where they're playing now, I want to tell you a bit more about their club, what happened to them after the National Soccer League, how many titles they won, how many seasons they played. I just don't want to read you a list from Wikipedia because that's quite boring. I want you to learn something about Australian football history. Speaking of Australian football history, Ange Ball is out. It's there on my shelf. This is not a paid promotion for the book by Vince Rigari. However, I'd probably like to do a video in the future looking at some of the great Australian football books. I've read quite a few, so there's quite a few good books out there, but let's get straight into this video. We're going to go by alphabetical order, going through all 14 clubs that competed in 1977 for the National Soccer League. And we start with Adelaide City. They played in almost every single National Soccer League season. The only season they missed out on was the last one. They dropped out pretty late ahead of the 03-04 season. And that's where Adelaide United got hastily formed and actually quite a success in the last season of the NSL. Across their stint in the top flight, they won 3 championships, they won 3 NSL Cups. Today, Adelaide City, they compete in NPL South Australia. They've won 7 titles since returning to the state leagues. Moving on to Brisbane City, nicknamed the Azzurri. As you can tell, they were formed by Italian migrants. They also had a nickname, the Gladiators, during a period when the NSL tried to get a bit more franchisey and Americanized with their nicknames. They competed in the NSL for the first 10 seasons from 1977 to 1986, and their best finish was 3rd back in 1981. But at the end of the 1986 season, they were demoted back to the Queensland state leagues, and that's where they compete now. They compete in the top flight of Queensland football, NPL Queensland. The other Queensland team competed in that inaugural season was the Brisbane Lions. It's not the Brisbane Lions that you might be more familiar with that compete in the AFL. This is Lions FC that you might know them more by. They're competing, well, they've been knocked out now, but they've competed in the 2024 Australia Cup. They were formed by Dutch migrants in 1957. They competed in the first 11 seasons of the NSL. Well, not the first 11, sorry. They competed in the first 10. They got demoted back to the Queensland State Leagues, came back for one more season in 1988, and then got demoted back again. This club kind of paved the way for the Brisbane Roar. So the Brisbane Roar was kind of formed by Lions. People from Lions FC got Brisbane Roar starting up competing in the A-League. Yeah, there's a bit of controversy around all that history, a bit all over the place. Probably a story for another video, but let's move on to the next team. Canberra City, a team that was actually formed specifically to compete in the National Soccer League in 1977. Johnny Warren, the champion of Australian football, he was involved in that inaugural season. They were nicknamed the Arrows. They competed in the first 10 seasons of the NSL, but at the end of 1986, they departed. They went back to Canberra football, and it's been a bit of a demise for Canberra City. They currently compete in the Capital League Division 2, the 3rd tier of Capital Football. They've really dropped off in recent years since returning to Capital Football. Our next club is Footscray JUST, based in Melbourne's west, in the suburb of Footscray, hence the name. JUST stood for the Yugoslav United soccer team, and they competed in the first 13 seasons of the NSL. They never really impressed, actually, except for a second place finish in the 1986 season. That was when the NSL was split into the North and South conferences, even though the northernmost teams from Queensland competed in the South Conference. Footscray JUST, they departed from the NSL at the end of the 1989 season. They were relegated to the Victorian State Leagues, and they were ultimately taken over a year later by the Argentinian community, and that ended Footscray JUST as we know it. So that club actually doesn't exist anymore. Our next club, Heidelberg United. That's their current name. In their first season in the NSL, they were known as Fitzroy United. One of the original 14 teams. They would go on to actually take part in 17 NSL seasons across 3 different spells. They competed from 1977 to 87. Got demoted, came back in 1989, demoted again, then returned for the 1990-91 season. That's when the season had swapped from winter to summer. And then they exited for good in 94-95, at the end of that season. Throughout their spell, they actually never won an NSL competition. They actually won 2 NSL Cups in 93 and 97. They did finish second a few times in 79 and 1980, and then 1984 when the Southern Conference was around. Today, Heidelberg, they compete in NPL Victoria, and they've won 2 titles since returning to the State Leagues in 2001 and 2018. Now, Marconi Stallions. This is one of the only few teams actually who've competed in all 28 seasons of the NSL. Back then, they were just known as Marconi or Marconi Fairfield. They were based out in the Sydney's western suburbs. They've been crowned champions of the NSL 4 times, making them the joint most successful team in the NSL. They also won an NSL Cup in 1980. I should explain that NSL Cup is kind of like the Australian Cup, but it was more exclusively for the NSL clubs towards the end. But they still had state league teams competing in it. Marconi lost the 1990 and the 1996 grand final. And at the end of the NSL, Marconi is one of those clubs that actually pushed to get inclusion into the new A-League competition. They were ultimately successful. Since then, and they've returned to the New South Wales State Leagues after the collapse of the NSL. They won a grand final in 2012, and they actually had a 2-season spell in the second tier of New South Wales football between 2016 and 2017. So there was actually some pretty dark times for Marconi. They ultimately returned to the top flight in 2018. They're actually announced as one of the founding 8 teams of the national second tier, but they're actually competing in a grand final this Saturday against Rockdale Illington in the New South Wales NPL grand final at Parramatta. So good luck to Marconi. Now the next club, I did a video charting the rise of the NSL competition, and I got a lot of feedback on the pronunciation of the club. I believe it's called Mooroolbark. I do apologise if I butchered that, and I do apologise for butchering it in that previous video. You can go check it out. But they were a founding member of the NSL in 1977, and they played a bit of a pivotal role for the NSL to kick off. Before it did, there was a bit of an issue between the Victorian clubs joining. They were kind of at loggerheads with the founders of the NSL. The Victorian State Leagues weren't particularly keen on giving up their biggest clubs, but Mooroolbark actually put their hand up. They joined the competition and paved the way for the rest of the other Victorian clubs to join the competition. Today, though, Mooroolbark, they're well down to the divisions in the Victorian State Leagues. They play in the Victoria State League Division 2 South East, and that's the 5th tier of Victorian football, so the 6th tier of Australian football overall. Now, one of also, like Marconi, South Melbourne. They've competed in every single NSL season, all 28 seasons. They're the self-appointed biggest club in Australia, so we're led to believe. They've won 4 grand finals, the same as Marconi, making them the joint most successful team in the NSL era. They've won a few NSL Cups. They won the Oceania Champions League, in which that ultimately led them to being named the Oceania Team of the Century, which is not much to brag about when you consider the quality of Oceania football. No offence to the other clubs in Oceania, I'm just trying to rip into South Melbourne. No offence to any Hellas fans, but your team's a pain in the arse. They did win that Oceania Champions League, and they actually got to compete in the inaugural FIFA Club World Championship. They actually got to play Manchester United at the Maracanã in Brazil, so that's pretty cool. Like Marconi, South were one of the clubs that tried to join the A-League in its inaugural season, but it was ultimately unsuccessful. After the collapse of the NSL, they returned to the Victorian State Leagues. They've applied to join the A-League on multiple occasions. And they're also one of the clubs that have been announced as an inaugural founder of the national second tier competition when that decides to kick off in 40 years. St George Budapest, hence the name. It was formed by Hungarian immigrants in 1957. They're actually one of the strongest clubs in Australian football throughout the 60s and the 70s before the creation of the National Soccer League. Budapest was actually relegated at the end of the 1980 season, but it bounced back in 1982, and a year later it was named national champions for the first and only time. Its only major trophy at the national level, so it's not actually won an NSL Cup. But by the end of the 1990-91 season, their fortunes had turned and they were relegated back to the state leagues. As of 2024, St George compete in the New South Wales NPL competition, which is the top level of football in New South Wales. It has actually been promoted quite recently back into the top flight of state league football in New South Wales. Now Sydney City, Sydney Hakoah, Sydney City Hakoah East. There's a lot of names this club is known by. I'm just going to call them Sydney City, or maybe Hakoah, or Sydney City East. Let's just go with Hakoah. They were one of the big, strong clubs and one of the pioneer clubs in trying to start up the NSL in 1977. They have won the joint most amount of titles alongside Marconi and South Melbourne. They won 4 championships across its time in the NSL. In fact, they won 4 championships in the first 6 seasons of the NSL. So they started the competition like house on fire. But despite this success on the field, Hakoah actually never drew significant crowds of note, unlike South Melbourne or Marconi. And so ultimately that led to the club's demise, and their fortunes began to dwindle. By the end of the 1987 season, Marconi was dumped from the NSL, I think after like a game or two, and they went to the New South Wales State Leagues. They spiraled down to the divisions, and they're actually rather a mediocre team for quite some time before they made a rapid rise back to the top flight of New South Wales football in 2016. They've since been relegated now, but as of the 2024 season, they're competing in State League 1, which is the second tier of New South Wales football and the third tier overall. Sydney Olympic. They played in all but one season in the NSL. They missed out on the 1980 season because they were relegated back at the end of 1979, came back in 1981. They won 2 NSL titles, won 2 NSL Cups, and following the demise of the NSL, Olympic went back to the State Leagues. They're actually one of the 8 foundation teams for the national second tier, so we'll get to see them back on the national stage one way or another. West Adelaide, they were winners of the 1978 NSL season, so the second season of the national competition. They actually competed in 19 seasons across 3 different spells, so they've been relegated, promoted back up. West Adelaide left the NSL for good at the end of the 1998-99 season. And kind of what's followed since that relegation has been a bit of a slow demise for the former national champions. The club actually almost folded and lived on through its junior arm, which had actually been legally separated from the senior club during what was a bit of a messy bankruptcy. It's quite messy with what's happened with West Adelaide since they've left the NSL, so it's almost worth a video, and I think I've got that written down. I do want to explore that in the future, kind of what happened to West Adelaide after they left the National League. The juniors joined with the state league club Adelaide Olympic, but in 2007 they returned to the West Adelaide name. A year later, the club had its senior team back and it won promotion back to South Australian's top flight in 2014. But as of 2024, West Adelaide competes in the State League 1 South Australian competition, which is the second tier of the state's football competition. And the last club to talk about here that I don't think many people would know about is actually a club called Western Suburbs, who are from Sydney's western suburbs, although you probably think it's more closer to the inner west now. It's based around Ashfield area. They played the first 2 seasons of the NSL, but it was rather uneventful, and at the end of the 1978 season, they folded. Well, not folded, they kind of amalgamated with IPL Leichhardt for the 1979 season, but IPL Leichhardt kept its name and Western Suburbs kind of folded. So was it really amalgamation or a folding? Anyway, they're not around anymore, so I guess it was a folding. even though it's an amalgamation. Anyway, that's all 14 clubs of the NSL. Like I said, if we get enough likes on this video, I'll consider doing all 43 clubs of the NSL. You have to give me some time to do that. That'll take a while to do, but you know, if that's what the fans want, I'll give it to them. Anyway, thanks for sticking around for this video. Please give us a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, leave a comment. Let me know if you saw any of these clubs compete in the NSL. But until next time, I'll see you in the next video.